that, well, that these are clearly the ones that are demanded within the marketplace, and that we've got a very high occupancy. This, we've got to begin to wonder, well, what's going on there? Is it that we've got a lot of older supply of housing stock? Is it overpriced? Is it not being managed well? Whatever the case may be. My point with this specifically as it relates to development is we have to understand which market segment it is that we're obviously attacking, because what happens as a general rule is when we start looking at market-based information, a lot of times that information is aggregated, meaning it's all lumped in together, meaning that you might end up with a situation of where the average occupancy, if we were to average all of those based upon number of units and whatever else, the average might be, I don't know, 75%. Well, just based on the average for the overall market, we'd say, well, it doesn't really make sense to do any development within the Miami market for residential. You follow? Right. But if we tore apart that market and segmented it down to these individual segments, what might we determine? We might determine it makes a lot of sense for us to consider developing high-end apartments within the city because they're pretty much fully occupied right now, and we would not touch these with a 10-foot pole. You sort of follow what I'm trying to get at? Yeah. Okay. All right. But as I was saying, those two pieces of information, are really what you're trying to search for. Now, a lot of the information, yeah, you can, pretty much pull it off the web, but in some instances, depending on what kind of property it is, your best source of information is doing what? Going directly to a broker. They're the ones that are closest to the market in knowing what is selling, what is leasing, what the occupancy rates are, who the prospective tenants are, and being able to utilize their knowledge base to potentially help you to better understand, well, what is that rental rate for that area and what are the occupancy rates. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Now, other pieces of the market analysis, yeah, you're going to be looking at absorption, you're going to be, looking at what's in the pipeline to be built, what permits have been pulled, that sort of thing. Looking at all of, once again, the comparable properties, all that information, looking at what the prospects are for the local economy, all those things are going to be kind of included in that. But at the core, a lot of what's going to be probably the most important for our purposes for feasibility is really going to be concerned with rental rates and occupancy. Okay, hop on the computer and specifically go back to Dropbox, and you're going to pull up the SFA front door, back door analysis, simple financial feasibility analysis. And what we're going to do is this. Once you get that pulled up, that spreadsheet, then you're allowed to take a 5-minute break. Okay? What's it called? SFFA. Front door, back door.
Spreadsheet, not the video.
No, spreadsheet. Okay? Once you get it pulled up, you can go on break. Otherwise, you're stuck here.
You download it.
Yeah, you need to download it so it opens up in Excel.
This is in the Dropbox folder?
Yep.
You don't need a password. SFA, front door, back door.
Okay, take advantage of this last break. We're stuck here until we finish. I'm about to break into the Red Bull so I can put it in overdrive.
I tried drinking those in college, it didn't work so well. Was up for like 2 days.
Come on. Right there, right there, right there. Click on it.
Where's the front door?
It's in the same file. Download.
Download. Open. Oh, yeah. Now, you know, life's easy now. You're welcome.
Is S-A. I was like, what are you doing?
Where you going? Where's the back door?
Do you have the Wi-Fi name or anything?
The what, sorry?
Do you have the password?
Yeah. It's on the bottom of that thing right, sitting right next to you, the red thing, red.
161.
I want to sit down and like enjoy it. We need to call them so it's there when we get there. Like Martin, when you get there, he dilly dallies.
Yeah, but that's, you know, that's, like, we're the first customer to the day.
Yeah.
Like, we're the first customer of the day.
You think?
Yeah, a lot of the times we are.
So they're still like, you know, trying to get the burners warmed up and.
I mean, I think that for how quickly we can get it, we really can't complain because.
I used to. And I don't think you should be watching YouTube
And then
videos.
finally you found it, you found out where half of us disappeared too.
You get those melts.
And then go to the outlets, yeah.
At work, when I'm down there, I like turn to go grab something like that, I'm like, I'm not going, I'm going to work for the rest of the day after.
I have to make sure that I'm outside.
One crashing on the ground. No.
Yeah, the last thing someone, if you're staring at a, enough to where like, I'm not saying like it's a bad thing, I'm just saying.
No, but it
It makes
would
it
be
harder,
bad.
so like stay away. So
UTA.
I'm lucky my boss is very social,
That's right, back where.
so we'll like just disappear for like an hour.
Oh, yeah, I leave and
Dilly
go,
dally
I'll go and drink the
down
bar.
Front door, S, F, A. Front door, back door.
Home stretch.
And when I say people go twice a day out to get coffee.
Really?
I'm not gonna lie.
That's a COVID,
And that's.
coffee at your son, you had a coffee like.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't
Like,
come
and
out.
I-
Yeah,
and they use that too.
where you work though, you might be able to get it for like $10.
See,
I don't know if they have a, like a student thing, but I know when I was in the military, like anybody could download the whole thing. I did it too. The green tea.
That's
You do
exactly-
the military, yeah. Yeah. What's that? What do you do in the as a pilot. Yeah. Yeah. It's instructor pilot for a little while. Huh? Taught all the young kids how to fly.
Let's see your finance. Do you have your finance book with you? Because mine's paperback. I mean.
Do you have
This is already good. Haven't been eating at this last time too.
That's 14th edition, today. Connections on the office. If I get a new laptop,
It's the same book, it's just.
Through the university, you should even get like a, almost a, virtually a free version.
How much did you pay for it? It's like 200.
I bought it in,
It's not so much
first
as
semester.
Yeah, I looked online.
You did the finance class first. Investment.
I wanted to ask him for a copy of my plan, but I figured.
Did you see all the answers he sent in the email? Like every answer, every question.
Okay, you ready? Let's go. All right, everybody should have this pulled up. If you haven't figured it out, you need to click on sheet number 2 down at the bottom. If you didn't already, the first one is the calculation of mortgage constant, which we'll talk about later. But just click on sheet number 2, should pull up this at the top. I just kind of sized it to fit just the front door approach. Everybody have this pulled up? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And the numbers all match? Okay. So the way that I constructed this, real simply, all of the green cells are your input cells, okay, that you can change. Don't change anything else that is not a green cell. The other cells all have formulas embedded within them, okay? So what you can do is you can kind of go down and you can sort of see what the formulas are, but actually it's a fairly easy process. If you sort of look over here on the left-hand side, all you're doing is this math that's over here, okay? Site acquisition cost plus construction cost equal total expected development cost, times loan-to-value ratio equals your permanent mortgage, times annualized mortgage constant, which is based off of your interest rate and your term, gives you that, equals the cash required for debt service, times lender required, and you can sort of work your way on down. The point is this: with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 input variables, you can determine the feasibility, the financial feasibility of a project and come up with what your required rent per square foot would be for that project based upon those. Does that make sense? So in other words, what you're starting with is the stuff up here at the top. You're starting with how much is the land going to cost me? How much is it going to cost me to develop, you know, in the sense of putting in roads, putting in potentially, you know, paving, landscaping, all that sort of stuff, site clearance, and then what are going to be my actual construction cost for the actual building that I'm building, and then ultimately, based off of that, everything else flows. But as you can begin to see, depending on your relationship with your lender, these 4 variables, the loan-to-value ratio, the interest rate, the term, and the debt service coverage ratio, all of which we talked about today, are going to influence basically the amount of income that you're going to need to have on that property on an annual basis in order for it to be feasible. Okay, so now if you were just looking at this, you're saying, well, how do I interpret this? How do I use this? Well, in the market, for this particular property, if the market rental rate is, let's say, 18 bucks a square foot, okay, is what the market rental rate is. Not for our project, but the market rental rate is 18 bucks a square foot. Based upon what we have found here, would our project be potentially financially feasible? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Why? Because we would only have to charge $15 a square foot. Therefore, in order to meet our requirements for feasibility, therefore, if the market rental rate is $3 more than that, at 18 bucks, we're going to be making more. We're going to be making a bigger profit, okay? That's a good thing. On the flip side, if the prevailing market rental rate for our specific product type in our particular market segment were, let's say, 11 bucks a square foot, then we would say not feasible.
Right.
Unless we changed one or more of our assumptions. Now, the point is not inherently to force it to be feasible. Okay, let's make sure that I am clear on that. The objective is not to force it to be feasible. The objective is to be honest about all of these assumptions. Okay? Because, yeah, we could probably make it feasible real simply by probably going in here and saying, oh, let's make it a 1% loan. Well, at a 1% loan, that gets us a heck of a lot closer to feasibility. Okay? But still, you know, if it's $11 a square foot, still technically not feasible. But you get the point. Okay? All right? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay? Now, we're going to look at the bottom one, which is the backdoor approach, which is just literally this one reversed. Okay? Where you start out with, you know what the rental rates are, and then you're ultimately going to, how much can I afford to spend on this thing, okay, in terms of the development costs, all right? So let's take a look at it. Okay, so with it, we start out knowing how many square feet the property has, what the rental rate is per square foot, and then it begins to flow from there of here's the income that it's going to generate. We know what the lender is telling us the required debt service coverage ratio is, our loan terms are, our loan to value, and then taking in, and that gives us effectively our maximum supportable project cost, subtract out our expected construction cost, and then that tells us the maximum amount we could spend on land. Make sense? Yes, no, possibly could be.
Yes.
Okay? Now, I would argue that those two models, or this, you know, you want to sort of say it's all one big thing, but this is going to be the most valuable tool you will have ever had with regard to understanding development financial feasibility. This one model is probably the one thing that you should tear this thing apart from top to bottom, bottom to top, and understand what is actually happening. Literally go through each individual calculation and say, where the heck is this coming from? Where is it going? How is this impacting the bottom line? It's only through doing that that you're going to understand it and you're going to be able to actually apply it. Because ideally, what you would like to be able to do is, you know, go out and you see literally any project, any particular property, and put in a few key pieces of information that are property specific, and then add in your financing terms, and then ultimately you're able to spit out a value. That's pretty cool. Okay? Now, you know, is it perfect? No, but it's the first solid, you know, sort of attempt at getting your head around, is the project a go or no-go sort of decision. Okay? Now, my argument would be pretty much any developer that has any level of sophistication has their own model, something either similar to this that they have created that will achieve kind of the same sort of thing. That basically says, we know that, you know, for this particular product type, we've got to get so many dollars per square foot in rent in order to basically build a project at a specific cost. That's all you're really doing here. Okay? So what I want you to do, spend a couple of minutes without me babbling, and you actually sort of take a look and sort of play around with this for a few minutes, and then we want to sort of talk about it after you've had a chance to sort of look at it. So we'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to just sort of play around with it. Okay?
Both approaches?
Both of them, just kind of, you know, like I said, just sort of play around with it, trying to look at what the formulas are, kind of where things are going, that sort of thing.
What's annualized mortgage constant?
Okay. The annualized mortgage constant is the interplay between what the interest rate is and what the term is. It is a way of expressing it as effectively a percentage of the loan on an annual basis. In other words, you can take this number and effectively, like say for a $100,000 loan, you're going to be paying 11.1% in total interest and principal cost over the course of that year. Because here's what's happening, and this is a very important point to make. You're saying, well, but yet your interest rate is 7.5%. Where are you getting 11? Well, keep in mind, your interest is just the interest. It's not including your principal cost, you know, in terms of your mortgage payment. You also pay back principal. This encompasses both, okay? And it takes that and it calculates that using basically, instead of sort of present value formulas to once again, take the interplay between those two.
So is this a oversimplification or just outright wrong to say that every year you're paying 11.12% of your loan?
No, that is not correct, because keep in mind, a good portion of that is interest.
Mm-hmm.
So this is only saying that your payment is 11.5% of the loan amount.
That's what I meant. Your overall payment,
Right.
principal and interest, is 11.
Yes, yes,
For the life of the loan.
right.
Right. And is that amortized
okay,
30
got it.
years? You have that in the formula?
Yeah, this is amortized, in this case, over 15 years.
Okay.
Is there a reason why you've kept that, why you didn't make it a percentage?
Just because that typically whenever this number gets expressed, it usually gets expressed like this. And for those of you that want to play with it, that is what sheet 1 is. Sheet 1 shows you basically, here are the mortgage constants for any given interest rate and any given term. And so you can kind of see what it actually works out to be.
Okay. So that gives you your debt service.
But before you, the annualized mortgage constant, that one stands for what? The one in the formula that comes after D8 times 12?
In this case, it is the, the type, which is effectively, is it a beginning of period or end of period? And don't really worry about that. That pretty much everything in real estate, we make the assumption that the cash flows are received at the end of the term. And now, it'll be something I can explain in more depth in the finance class 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
But it's at this point in time, I think let's quick second. You got beginning of term and end of term. You may pay your rent at the beginning of the month, but the reality is that for kind of accounting purposes, it doesn't really get fully reflected by the property owner until the end of the month or end of the year. And so Excel allows you to make the assumption, when are you actually receiving that money? Are you receiving it at the beginning of the period or at the end of the period? And if it's a beginning of the period, you put a 0. If it's the end of the period, you put a 1. So another cool thing, now that you're kind of playing around with this a little bit, that you could do is that you could hop on LoopNet, take a look at some properties that are potentially for sale, and you're going to have a few key pieces of information. You're going to have probably the square footage, you're going to have the rental rate per square foot, you may even have the occupancy rate given to you. The part you may not have is probably the operating expenses, but if it's an absolute triple net, then you obviously, in that case, you're not going to have any operating expenses as the property owner. And then you can come up with what you feel like would be the generic sort of loan terms that you might be able to get. And so the point being is you should be able to very quickly back into what effectively, if the price that they're asking for the property is within reason, or if it's just out there and you know, crazy town. Yep.
For construction costs, what do you just kind of?
Well, construction costs, what I would use as a baseline estimate, and you're getting a little bit ahead of me, that's okay, is to go to RS Means. They have a website that allows you to get a free estimate of construction cost on a very limited basis. Let me show you if I can dig it out here.
$15 million.
Okay.
Oh,
here we go. Okay, so it's under www.rsmeans.com/calculator/index ASP, and so what it looks like is this, okay? Maybe so I can blow it up a little bit for you. Okay, so what you can do with this is you can pick your product type. Okay, everybody should be paying attention to this. You're going to need this. So you either listen now or you're going to be lost. All right, you can pick your product type, and you've got an extremely wide variety of product type, okay, in terms of offices, hotels, different types of offices and hotels, retail stores. So let's just say we take a typical retail store, okay, and we say gross square footage of 100,000 square feet, and we put this in the zip code here, 33301, and let's see what it gives us. Okay, so what it has done, okay, the data is a couple of years old, but in Fort Lauderdale, split face concrete block steel joist retail building of 100,000 square feet with union wage rates, no basement, they're saying that the low cost estimate would be, well, if we include everything in terms of architectural fees and contractors overhead, the low end would be 6.7 million, the high end 9.3 million. And the variance would obviously be probably construction quality and you know, but this is only, now keep in mind, this is only the construction cost of the building. This does not include your land cost. Everybody follow me on that, yes or no?
Yes.
Bob your heads up and down, okay. This is only the construction cost. So with this, you would have to put into play what specifically your land cost would be. So let's just take this number. This is a great way to kind of illustrate our model here. All right? So if we go back, 7.461, okay.
Has both the soft and hard costs?
Yeah. Okay, so in this particular case, so we'll start off, we're going to put 0 as our land cost here for a second. And the construction cost that it had was what, 7 million, what was it? Somebody tell me, 7 million?
500,000?
Okay, we'll just round it off, 7,500,000. I think it was like 7.4 something. But 7.5 million, and we need to increase the width this a little bit, okay? And assuming that we could get an 80% loan to value ratio, that's probably a high interest rate. So what would you say for retail, the going interest rate would be right now?
5.5.
Okay, 5.5, let's say. All right, and debt service coverage ratio is probably gonna be a little bit higher than that, maybe 1.3. Okay, operating expenses, we're just gonna put it at 0. Occupancy rate, 90% is probably okay. Leasable square feet is going to be 100,000 based upon this. All right, and so it's saying based upon all of that. Now that's, once again, that's just construction cost, so that's not land cost included. So just on the construction cost, we would have to charge $8.50 a square foot. Now, what would be our land cost for that center?
$20 a foot?
Probably, so 20 times
300,
100,000 plus, because you've got also, you've not just the land the building sits on, but you've also got parking and everything else. So you could very well have $3-4 million worth of land cost, roughly. So let's just say $4 million of land cost. All right. So right there, that's going to get us to a point of where $13 a square foot is what we would have to charge as a rental rate for that particular retail property. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Now, what we would do is say, okay, in Fort Lauderdale, where this property, that's where the construction costs were, is that a reasonable rate, in other words, how does that compare to the market in this area? Is that below, or is that equal to or higher than this area? Well, you know, one thing we could begin to do is go to like LoopNet and properties for lease, and see what it pulls up. Okay, and sort of retail, 22 bucks a square foot, 23, that's all office. Let's see what
If you go up on the left, it has the options of what type. Go down, on the left, there's like check marks in the bottom left corner.
oh, here we are, yep. Alright, so really high there, but the lowest I see is like 21 bucks a square foot. $16 a square foot. The ones that are obviously higher, here's the thing. What's driving those higher rental rates? The cost of land.
What could be triple net? I don't, what type of leases are there?
Most of them are probably gonna be triple net, I would expect. But the point being is you get the general idea of what you would be doing. You'd be investigating to see, all right, how close are we relative to what the actual market rents are, and you know, is it look like we're, you know, anywhere close to what the rental rates are within the market. And what it looks like is that we probably are well below the market relative to what we have found, but what may actually be the case is our site acquisition cost. And this is one of the things that's tough for me coming from Texas to get used to, is how expensive the land costs are here. Okay? Texas, it's, you know, in my mind, it's abhorrent to think that your land costs are ever going to exceed like 20 or 30% of your construction cost. And here, your land costs could very easily equal or be greater than, in some cases, the land cost. So, but that's going to be a big driving factor, that as those site acquisition costs get higher, that's going to drive up, obviously, that rental rate. Okay? Make sense, Robert?
Now, this model, it doesn't necessarily include what you're trying, your profits that you would prefer, or your return.
What it does is what it does is you will make a profit off of this if you meet that criteria, but then what you have to do is then effectively remodel it into what your actual revenues are expected to be to figure out then what your rate of return is going to be. This is just simply giving you,
Break even.
it's break even, yes, but it is also kind of it's a way for you to play sort of a sensitivity analysis of kind of going in and saying, well, what if we were able to get a little bit of a better deal on the financing? What if we were able to potentially pass more of the expenses on to the tenants? What if we were able to raise our occupancy rate? What sort of impact would that be enough to change the outcome? You know, because we could stress test it and basically see, because it works both ways. We could also, you know, from the standpoint of how low could we go with regard to, you know, on the worst possible case scenario of how much we would spend for land, how much we would spend in terms of our debt, you know, expenses and occupancy level, and what would that ultimately be? And even with that number, if it still makes sense, then we've got to feel pretty good.
We could just add on the bottom there, expected market rent and get your profitability based on that.
Right. Because this already assumes there's going to be some level of profit built into it by virtue of the restrictions that the lender places on you in terms of debt service coverage ratios and that sort of thing. So it's not really a break even. It is because you're not earning $0 as a result of this if you charged this. You're still getting a return because the lender is requiring you to effectively still have a 30% cushion in there of your, you know, all you have to do is to sort of say, all right, we've got our, the net operating income here of 1.1 million, and we've got the debt service of 902, so we can subtract this from this, and then ultimately that's going to tell us that we're making a couple $100,000 a year in profit. Make sense?
So is that, would your return be the same as a lender on that, as a 5.5 or not?
No. You're going to have to go in and specifically calculate what the differences between these two. You're going to have to figure out specifically what is the dollar amount that you're actually, the dollar amount that you're contributing to your equity, okay? And then calculate the return based on that, and then the reversion price. Which we will be doing all of that, just not today.
So we'll get to a spreadsheet that incorporates
Yes,
everything?
yes,
Perfect.
yes. This is just the beginning, okay? Gotta start somewhere, okay?
Problem.
All
But
right.
shouldn't this tell us what the return is that we're getting at this point? I mean, if
No,
you guys
this
look
does
at
not tell us a return, okay? This only tells us, is it feasible, is it not feasible? The return, we're gonna have to calculate using some of the pieces of data from this, but this does not tell us a return. We can make it tell us a
But
return.
if market rents are $13.50, is it feasible? Is this telling us that it's feasible?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes,
With all the caveats of this only
Right.
construction costs.
right. Because what we would do is we would build a model that would basically incorporate, okay, this is now our rent, so this is now our potential gross income. You know, here's our effective gross income, here's our net operating income, and based on that net operating income, after we subtract out the debt service, as I said, what we're seeing, the difference between those two is a couple $100,000. That is going to be the cash flow that we, as the developer, get to keep on an annual basis. And then based upon what our initial cash outflow is in terms of our equity, then we can calculate our internal rate of return using that, and then what the expected reversion would be after so many years. We will do that, okay? I'm trying to promise you, we will do that, okay? Just right now, focus on this aspect, because this is the tool that you need as a developer. This is the tool that gets you to the point of being able to make the go, no-go sort of decision in a very succinct sort of way.
Both sides require rate of return.
Right, but this is simply letting you know, will it work within the market? It's not looking at your return, it's just simply looking at, will it work within the market under the constraints of your lender and the market? You could have a much higher sort of hurdle rate that this is not going to tell you. You're going to have to do a few other calculations to get there.
For residential?
For residential, it's a whole different thing because it's a sales model.
Yeah.
For residential, since you're not generating rent, it's all about really the timing of the cash flows, and ultimately it's a completely sales-driven model, which is totally different.
Are we gonna do one for residential?
We can.
You could essentially use this, so couldn't you just do things, change out?
Well, you could do it if you looked at it and you ultimately change it to where it's like a required sales price per square foot kind of thing.
Exactly right.
Just normalized by month.
And you do it, for residential anyway, you do it per square foot, so potentially you could still add into it.
Yeah, no, you can. And the beauty of all of this is, once again, this is not the only way to do it. This is just kind of a fairly standard, basic way to get there.
It's like a quick and dirty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should I invest more time thinking about it?
Yeah.
Litmus test.
And I mean, you can complicate this up as much as you possibly want,
We're gonna do that.
okay? But this is at the fundamental level to try to get you there. Okay, let's look at one more spreadsheet, assuming I can get there without screwing this up. No, it looks like I'm going to have to reload the Dropbox here. And let's look at the lead SUST comparison spreadsheet. And just download it. LEED SUST comparison spreadsheet. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and zoom to the whole thing, so you can't read the numbers from where you are, but you got the spreadsheet in front of you so you can change it, but I want to sort of talk about it. Here, this is kind of a modified version of the front door, back door analysis, but what this model is doing is attempting to make a side-by-side comparison. As you can sort of read up here in the top left-hand corner, I created this a couple of years ago. I thought it was a really useful tool to kind of, when you're looking at LEED certified buildings, of basically, I want to make a comparison between an ordinary building and a highly energy efficient building. And specifically, all of the yellow cells are input cells. All of the other cells are formulas, so don't mess with them. So for those yellow cells, what we can do is we can go in and we can change any of them and then see what the resulting impact is going to be, the flow through with regard to what is the overall required rental rate per square foot, but also what is going to be the before tax rate of return, which gets at specifically Mr. Mancini's issue of looking at what is the hurdle rate, okay? Basically, in this particular case, we go through all of this, we see the required per square foot required rental rate is $21, and that's going to give us a 10.07% overall rate of return. Well, that may not be good enough for us in terms of our hurdle rate for our investors. Our investors may be wanting something north of 15 or 20 or whatever it might be. So that means we're going to have to go back and potentially make modifications. But that's not really the real benefit of this particular spreadsheet, is the whole idea of making a comparison between two different approaches to developing a property. And it doesn't have to even be with the whole ordinary building versus LEED certified or energy efficient. It could just simply be, I want to compare a baseline building with something different, okay? And that something different could be, I want to have different type of finish out. And is that different finish out that I place in that building going to achieve high enough rents to substantiate it? Do you follow? That's the beauty of a model like this, is then you can kind of look line by line, what is the impact? Let me flow you through the logic on this. It's fairly straightforward logic, or at least I thought it was whenever I created it. And that is, okay, we start out here with the construction cost. Obviously, for an energy efficient building, you would expect the construction cost to be higher than an ordinary building. So, thus $225 a square foot versus $200. Total square feet, obviously the same for the building. Land acquisition costs are the same. Then we have a line item here for governmental rebates for energy and sustainability. Well, what that allows us to do is to basically, what I was talking about earlier, whenever the government intervenes in the market, they're potentially helping you out with your feasibility by giving you this upfront incentive, but what's the flow-through effect on that? Okay, you had to spend more money to build the building, but yet you're getting a rebate from the government for having done so. All right? So ultimately, what does that translate into actual development cost? Well, it's still more expensive to do the LEED building in terms of overall construction cost, even with that $500,000 rebate, because your overall construction costs are so much greater.
Right.
Okay? Then we move on down here to the part that begins to be kind of interesting in terms of how you think about it. Maximum loan-to-value ratio. Why would you expect that a lender might give you a higher loan-to-value ratio on a highly energy-efficient building? Because you hopefully have lower than normal operating costs. Therefore, lower risk. Therefore, we might lend you more money. Okay? Same thing on the interest rate. by virtue of it being a more energy efficient building, might we offer you a lower interest rate because we as a lender perceive it to be a lower risk. Okay, moving on down. Debt service coverage ratio, same sort of logic. We are willing to give you a more favorable debt service coverage ratio, once again, tying into this whole risk that we're saying the energy efficient building is less risky, therefore we're going to give you a more favorable rate on the debt service coverage ratio. Operating expenses, that's a logical one, that you would expect an energy efficient building has lower operating expenses, okay? And then finally, vacancy and collection loss. You would expect that a highly energy efficient building, that the tenants are paying less in utilities and that there's potentially nicer, overall sort of experience for them, that there's a chance that you might be able to get a higher occupancy for the energy efficient building than you would for the normal building. And then what does all that translate into? Well, still means you're probably going to charge a little bit more per square foot in order to get to basically make this obviously financially feasible, but you can do the sort of side-by-side comparison and see whether or not that actually would play out in the market. Would you be able to charge that premium of an extra, roughly $1.10 a square foot for the energy efficient building versus the one that is less energy efficient? And that's assuming that's the net rental rate. However, on the gross, look at what the case is there. It's reversed. Your actually rental rate for gross is substantially less than it is. It's less for the energy efficient one than it is for the ordinary building, and the reason for that is because the operating expenses are less.
Right.
Okay? But then overall, then the rate of return, not that dramatically different between the two. But this is just an example. It's a hypothetical example. It was meant to be kind of to help you to think about what the issues are and kind of how they translate into the overall return. Make sense? Okay? So, with that, questions? Thoughts? Observations?
Wait, I have a question. You were just explaining the PGI. If it's lower as far as the income, the expenses, then it would be lower. Like,
well, the PGI.
Yeah, that's what I felt like it should be. Like, I don't get why it's more.
The potential, in this case, the potential gross income for this property is going to be a little bit lower, but it's only because we're working backwards. And ultimately, what it really boils down to is that on a gross per square foot basis, it actually is more favorable to do the energy efficient building than it is for the ordinary building. Whereas on a net basis, where you're actually taking into account the operating expenses associated, you're actually having those paid, the difference is just the opposite. It's all, in other words, the point is there is a benefit to the energy efficiency of basically taking into account that operational difference of the operating expenses. Okay.
Yeah, but it's not a huge difference, is that theory behind it?
In this particular example, with those numbers, which for the most part are fabricated numbers, I purposely set it up to where it was not really a dramatic difference. It was meant to be kind of, how can we sort of show it side by side and be kind of somewhat similar, but kind of see where the changes are occurring.
Usually it's debatable, right? Because they still haven't come up with an answer if it's really.
The problem is we don't have the operating history. We don't have the operating history of a lot of these sort of energy efficient features that have been placed into buildings to know, are they really working? Are the cost savings really, truly there? Because a lot of it has to do with the end user and how well they effectively are mirroring what was set up by the designer to occupy that space. A perfect case in point, one of the properties I visited in Brisbane, Australia a couple of years ago, you had a designer that had set up the property, and it was one of these amazing office buildings of where that, you know, during the day, depending on where the sun was, it had sensors, and the shades would come down and block out the sun, you know, whenever the sun was, you know, beaming in the windows. They would raise whenever it was in a different position in the sky. It would also, on a particular office floor, it was zoned so that, once again, whichever areas are experiencing the most heat gain, the air conditioning would focus on those particular areas to cool down the building, or, you know, not so much run it over in other parts, so you would have a consistent flow. You had all the lights that were, you know, set up to be the most efficient sort of layout. But one of the interesting sort of issues they found operationally was that the designer had set it up to where it was meant to be that no office or no cubicle or whatever was to be immediately adjacent to the windows. And part of that was to minimize the cooling cost, that, you know, you would keep them like maybe 8 to 10 feet away from the window, because obviously even with the treated window, anyway, not trying to belabor the story, but the point is that the designer had set it up to where the end users would be here. Well, what ended up happening was end users end up putting themselves immediately adjacent to the windows. They were working non-standard hours in the building, so the HVAC systems were being turned on virtually 24 hours a day, as opposed to just during normal working hours. They had a complete rearrangement of the lighting system. You had the tenants not, you know, turning off their monitors or their computers over the course of the day. You had all these things working against what was originally designed, and as a result, what you ended up finding was it really didn't perform that significantly better. In some cases, actually performed worse than the ordinary building would have performed. You know, so a lot of it really gets back to this business of, you can, you know, go in with the best of intentions and design it, you know, to try to be super energy efficient, but the end user may totally destroy, in one sense, all of those sort of good intentions by how they end up actually using the facility. Okay, one of my all-time favorites, actually, on that sort of, one of the properties, another property in Australia that we visited, it was a resort community, Curran Cove Resort. And when they built this, it was meant to be this eco-friendly, sort of super high-end, 5-star resort. And one of the features that they had in place, and this was super cutting edge at the time, this was like 99, 2000, every single one of like the 300 or 400 units in the property, everything was individually monitored. So all of your water use was monitored, all of your electricity use was monitored. They had gone to the extent of, you know, selecting the most energy efficient appliances. But the beautiful part about it was, you as a tenant, or not a tenant, but as an occupant of the space, could turn on your TV in your room and you could see in real time what your energy consumption was for your room relative to everybody else. Okay? And kind of whether you're under-consuming, over-consuming, you know, whatever. Well, what was fascinating about this was, initially they said, all right, if you're the lowest user of electricity, of water, of, you know, everything, you get a free room. So you have, keep in mind, this is like a 5-star resort, super nice. We're not talking some slum, you know, thing. You know, like $500 a night to stay in this place. And so, anyway, they did this, and so what you end up happening, the behavior of people, you know, begins to take over, and so you have everybody basically, you know, never turning on their lights, never flushing their toilets, not taking any showers, you know, and all of try to win, you know, the room night. Well, it was great for the hotel, you know, short term, in the sense that their, you know, operating expenses, you know, were dramatically lower than what they ordinarily would have been, but yet, you know, that kind of an environment, it wasn't inherently sustainable, you know, of really doing that long term. But what they, and this is the part that really is sort of sad, is that the cost savings associated with that, while it was dramatic, a few years later, they realized that they wanted to put in-room, on-demand movies. And apparently that system for the on-demand movies was incompatible with the system that provided the information about effectively your usage, and so they had stopped the whole competition thing, and to have the in-room, on-demand movies. But the sad part of the story was they made a lot more money off of the in-room on-demand movies than they were actually saving off of the cost savings of the the energy stuff. But just kind of an interesting sort of thing that all sorts of folks over the years have really tried to come up with these things to try to save energy costs, and certainly in extreme climates it seems to make a lot of sense, but yet do we really have in a lot of cases the operating data to really be able to 100% substantiate that, to really allow us to say, are these really truly legitimate outcomes from this? And that, to a certain extent is to be determined. But it's good food for thought for you to think about as a prospective developer, to what extent you want to try to incorporate these things and want to focus on those sorts of things. Okay? Thoughts, questions?
Can you see if yours works with the percentage?
What do you mean?
Like if you change the input on the top, it changes the percent at the bottom. Yeah.
I think
I didn't change.
it may be that the relationship holds constant. That it also, let me check here. Yeah, it's going to be based more on the financing.
Okay.
Because otherwise, what it's doing, I think, is the relationship is holding constant. Okay. Okay. All right. Anything else? You feel like you learned anything today? Okay. And hopefully, is your brain permanently damaged, or is it just,
It'll take 7 days.
Okay. So, all right. So here's what's going to happen. This course, the development course, with me, you are going to have 2 deliverables. You're going to have a midterm exam that's going to be in a few weeks that will cover all of our kind of lecture sort of stuff and this sort of feasibility stuff. And then you will also have a project that will be due at the end of the semester. I have yet to determine in what form that project will be. It could be a group project, it could be an individual project, it could be a small group. My anticipation would be that it might be a project where you have 2 team members, and that way it's clearer who participates, who doesn't, as opposed to having a larger group of 5 or 6 people where it's very difficult to determine who's and what their contribution is. So be thinking about who in here you might want to partner with, or who you might want to avoid to partner with. Okay, and as a result, then we'll begin to think about in the next few weeks who that you're going to partner with and what kind of project that we're going to go with. In the past, I've done projects where I've had everybody work on the same project. I've also done it where we've selected different property types and allow everybody to kind of focus on a different property type. We've also, done projects that are just here within Fort Lauderdale versus kind of expanding out. So I'm, pretty open, and it keeps it kind of interesting for me to do it a little bit different each time. But so be thinking though about what kind of project that you might want to do, and if there's a particular property type that you may want to be involved with, then we can kind of break it up that way and sort of say, okay, you may be so sick of retail that you want to do something completely different than retail. You may be so sick of hospitality that you want to do something totally different than hospitality, and so forth, so on, because part of the thought process is that hopefully you're going to learn some new stuff, okay, and not just kind of reinforce what you already know about a particular product type that you're already familiar with, okay. So think about that a little bit now. In terms of reading, the book, once again, just like with the finance class, this is not obviously going to be a PowerPoint-driven kind of course. So the expectation is, yeah, you're going to be kind of reading the book. And the way the book is structured, if you look at it, it's pretty much starts out with a couple of introductory chapters, but then it gets into specific chapters on property types. Okay? So if you look at it, the first chapter is introduction, then second chapter, organizing for development, third chapter, specifically land development, so more kind of on the residential, single-family residential kind of land development side, then multifamily residential, office development, industrial development, retail development, and then trends and issues. So those are the major categories that the book addresses, and then with each of those categories, within each of the chapters, what it does is kind of what we were doing on the board earlier in terms of outlining how is site analysis different for retail than it is for office, than it is for industrial, so forth, so on. Make sense? So what I would think you would want to do is to sort of say, okay, which of those sort of product types would I have an interest in actually doing a project on, and then looking at that specific chapter to kind of begin to get some ideas of the types of things that you would be sort of facing. Okay, make sense? Yes? Okay, well, I guess unless you've got any other questions, we're pretty much done.
The syllabus that's on the portal, that's...
The syllabus is on the portal, don't worry about that. The only thing you've got to concern yourself with is the schedule for this class. And the schedule for this class is on the Dropbox site. It shows you the dates that we're going to be here, and as far as the content of what we're going to be covering, what I would suggest, here's what I would suggest you do. What I would suggest you do is that you read basically chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 8, and then pick one of the other chapters that's a product type that you're most interested in learning about, and come prepared to kind of work through that. Okay?
1, 2, and 8?
1, 2, and 8 plus a chapter that you are most interested in. Okay? All right? I mean, ultimately, you should be reading all of them, but what I'm trying to get you to do is to really think about, okay, initially, which product type are you most interested in? Okay? Anything else? Okay, go home.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, do any of you, just one quick question. Do any of you not have a PC-based laptop?
What?
Do any of you not have a PC-based laptop? Okay, come and grab one of these. You're going to need it.
That Mac. Big dog, big dog.
Okay, grab one of those. You're going to need that for, because you're going to have to load the software in for next week. And Kevin's going to be sending you the Microsoft Project Pro.
Maybe I'll put
The parallels. See if it'll work with that. I don't. Yeah, I've tried. Not that. I've tried using it with Argus and it didn't work, but I don't know about Project Pro. Well, the problem is we may not be able to install it on those.
Now I gotta go,
Okay. All right.
You're welcome to take one. Or,
Take it.
okay.
I'm gonna leave it. Maybe I'll get it next class.
Okay.
It doesn't work on the Mac?
It's not going to work on the Mac. I don't think.
We're gonna be in here though next class, right?
Yeah, well, okay. Next week you're going to be in here, but it's not going to be me. It's going to be Kevin Hogan, and he's the one that you're going to have the
But
software installed.
you're saying we probably can't download it on there?
No.
They wouldn't let us, or
Well, that's probably more than likely. Yes.
they put a block on it?
Yeah.
Next week.
We're going to try to investigate that and what they're going to allow us to
Yeah,
do.
I guess now we're all out, so.
What?
I think we're all out loud.
Well, there you go.
So, what's my solution then?
I've got one more laptop. I don't have it with me, but I can potentially loan it out.
Okay. All right, we'll do that then.
so do we have to bring our laptops?
Yes.